This time it's Engine Masters meets Roadkill because we've got the Rotsun's Turbo 5-liter Ford, and we're gonna find out how good that Power Stroke diesel turbo really is. Welcome back to West Tech Performance in Mira Loma, California for another episode of Engine Masters presented by AMSOIL. Now today, we're gonna be taking a junkyard Power Stroke diesel turbo and using it to boost a bone stock 5-liter Ford Mustang engine. If you're aware of our Roadkill show that I do with Mike Finnegan, you know that we've got this 71 Datsun 240Z that's called the Rotsun. And in a recent episode, we installed this motor and the turbo in that car. We took this out of a 1987 Mustang. This engine is very similar to what you would find in the junkyard from any of those Mustangs from 1985 to mid-1992. That's when they had factory roller cams and they had forged pistons in them. The compression ratio varied just a tiny bit year to year. This being an 87, it's 9.1 to 1, and I'm really hoping that the ring end gaps are worn out enough that they don't butt together and give us a problem once we put the turbo on this thing, because honestly, we didn't even hose this off. It is bone stock from the valve covers down. All we got here is a Holley 750 carb that we're gonna baseline it with before we change it to turbo. We have a big Edelbrock Victor Jr. single plane intake manifold, just because that's gonna be way happier with the turbo program than if we put a dual plane on it, which would be more appropriate for this engine in its current configuration, because eventually we're gonna cram some boost through this thing. But first, we gotta hang it in there and find out what this pooch makes naturally aspirated. Normally when we're doing stupid things with boost, AMSOIL recommends that we run their 60 weight oil. This time though, I'm really concerned that thick oil and heavy oil pressure is gonna break the distributor shaft in this Ford. It can happen. So I'm gonna run the Dominator oil, which is a 1030 instead of the 60. Dominator, again, has got that really good film strength so that you don't bounce a bearing directly off the crankshaft while we're boosting this thing. I think it's gonna be okay. Now, let me show you the only proven method to prevent me from spilling oil all over the engine. Better do it the right way. These blocks are famous for literally splitting in half at 500 horsepower. Those 5-liter 302 blocks, not small block Fords in general, but these in particular, literally.
They go right from the cap into the cam tunnel, don't they?
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it's gonna run right immediately.
Did this thing vibrate in the car?
Is it shaking?
No, I'm asking that because I dug a pound of dirt out of the balancer.
Oh, really?
I looked and you couldn't see any bolts. It was just like smooth and centrifugal force and mud and water had just kind of made it like this nice smooth cup. Looked like pottery.
It evened out. Wow. That's how a fluid damper works. It's fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've run these stock 5 liters a bunch and you know, they make 260, 280. What?
No.
That was a definite snicker.
It was.
I want to know what that was.
That was ridicule.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
I want to get to the root of that snicker.
Why?
You've seen these, so it's just like unfair. I don't even have.
You got nothing?
I got nothing.
You've run these. If I've run them, you've run them.
But never with this much dirt and grease on them.
And never with like a Victor Jr. on it.
Any guesses?
265.
285.
279.
Price is right.
That's not bad.
So close, so close.
Yeah, you almost called it.
Almost.
That was way off.
Looks like we got 312.6 pound-feet of torque at 3,800 RPM and 277.9 horsepower at 5,400 RPM. So exactly what we expected. Look how nice that thing runs, though. I mean, the factory motors are actually engineered really good.
How many miles were on this thing when you yanked it out of the car?
All of them. I have no idea.
Really?
It's well over 100.
Oh,
I just look at it, it's got to have 130 or 40 or 50,000 on it, and I'm just judging that by the depth of grease and dirt.
Well, despite all the filth on the outside, I didn't see blow-by or smoke out of the exhaust.
Especially since we've driven it in the Rotsun with that turbo on it.
A lot of kind of the classic car engine guys look for motors like this.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
covered in oil, because then they at least know it's not a rusty piece of junk.
Yeah, or hasn't been rebuilt or something.
Yeah,
So I'm happy with that baseline. You ready to go put turbo on it?
that's what we're here for. That's what the fun's for.
Wow, is this a mess? That's because it's pure roadkill. We had all of this stuff on that 302 running and driving in the Rotsun, and man, is it fast. That car weighs like 2,500 pounds. It is just killer. But we're about to find out exactly how much power it takes to make that thing so scary. Here's what we've got. This turbocharger is directly off of a Ford Power Stroke diesel. It's totally wrong for the application, but it makes power. We do have a Banks exhaust housing on it, and that was really to help us kill some lag when we had this thing on a 4.3 Chevy V6. And it helped a little bit, but it was still kind of a mess. However, on the 302, this thing has throttle response. It's really good, actually. This isn't just a dyno test. We've driven this in the real world, and it works. We had to change around our exhaust side. The hot side is a big hater pipe on the Rotsun, but we had to modify this just for the dyno so that we weren't burning the ceiling. Then there's the key to making this whole thing really dirt cheap, which is the fact we were able to reuse the 5-liter Mustang exhaust manifolds, which look a lot like a shorty header, but with much worse bends in them. We were able to take this thing and flip it upside down to mount the turbo, as you'll see on the dyno. Now, normally on a small block Ford, you wouldn't be able to do that, because if you look carefully, you can see that the bolt pattern on the header is not perfectly centered in the tube. So if you had a good opening on the header, and if you had a really good cylinder head on it with a larger port, when you flipped it over, you would have a massive exhaust leak. But fortunately, all of this stuff in the stock program is small enough that you don't have a problem with it, and so it works out perfectly. We have a teal wastegate on it, which is really more valuable than all of the rest of this stuff combined, except for maybe the carburetor. Yep, we're running this thing in a blow-through configuration. This is a 650 CFM unit from QFT, which does make off-the-shelf blow-through intended carburetors. You can see we've got our hat over here, and we also have a blow-off valve. So the thing's pretty functional, except for the fact that it smokes bad. It burns so much oil through the turbo. I haven't even broken this to Brule yet, but he's gonna have oil spatter all over the room. But we mitigate that a little bit with this pump. Even with the drain going straight down on this turbo, it just doesn't evacuate the oil like it should, which is why it smokes so bad. But when we hook up this pump, it actively sucks the oil out of the turbo, and it helps a lot. Speaking of actively sucking, let's go bolt this stuff to that 302 and find out what happens. It didn't take long to get all this stuff hung on the engine. I mean, Finnegan and I had all of this in the car, so it went pretty quick even though it's super ugly. Let me tell you about this whole science experiment and how it works. First of all, you saw that we flipped the exhaust manifolds over, and so we've got the exhaust here, both sides, feeding into the exhaust housing on the turbocharger. So what happens is that the expanding gases of the heat of the exhaust spin the wheel inside the turbo. The exhaust that is then vented out of the turbo comes here through the pipe that in the car was sticking straight up. We have our oxygen sensor plugged into the pipe so that we can test our air-fuel ratio when we're running to make sure that it's safe. This oxygen sensor is a little close to the end of the pipe. If I was running in a car, I would worry about it backfeeding and giving some bogus readings, but at wide open throttle, it'll be fine. So, we're spinning the wheel inside the turbocharger, which in turn spins the impeller, which is sucking air through this hole and discharging it all the way through here to our carburetor hat. On our carburetor hat, we've got a blow-off valve, which is connected here to manifold vacuum, so that when the thing is idling, it'll bypass some air so that it idles more easily. Also, Just like a centrifugal supercharger that I described in a previous episode, the blow-off valve works so that when you're at wide open throttle at 0 vacuum and then let off the throttle and you've still got some boost happening, you don't back that boost up into the intake track. It actually just bypasses it. There is the hose that goes to the bypass valve is also going to our data logger on the dyno so that we can look at what our manifold boost is. We have a secondary data channel that is going to the boost inside the hat so that we can look at the pressure drop from the hat to the manifold through the carburetor. We also have lines on the hat that are connected to a boost referenced fuel system, which is really important. Because we've got boost going into the carburetor fuel bowls, that means that if you have 7 pounds of fuel pressure going this way, 7 pounds of boost going that way, you have no fuel flow. So the boost referenced fuel regulators make sure that fuel pressure increases in conjunction with boost so that you continue flowing fuel through the carburetor. Up here, we have got our wastegate that we're gonna use to control our peak boost. Because if you go all the way back here, we have a little rudimentary organized leak that is in fact a boost controller. It adjusts how much manifold pressure is going on the backside of the diaphragm in the wastegate so that we can adjust how that spring works so that we control how much total boost is gonna make it into the engine. It also has a top port in it. You can run a sophisticated boost controller that goes on both sides of this that can control both sides of the diaphragm and really keep a nice boost curve. This one is once again as sketchy as the rest of the program, but you know what? It is gonna work wicked. Watch this.
I'm kind of frightened by the high torque.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
Steve and I were not liking that ugly looking dyno curve though, so we're considering just
Parking it.
Parking it?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Perfection. There we go.
Did you hear it?
Yes.
Wow, that's awesome.
It won't break.
And let's look at the
Look
graph.
at the torque though.
Oh, the torque is brutal. Wow. We made 617.8 pound-feet of torque, more than 2 pound-feet per cubic inch, and 550.8 horsepower.
Wow.
But that's not the whole story. Pull up the naturally aspirated curve. This is with no turbo. This is with turbo. I have to do the math. How much did we gain here? We essentially gained 305 pound-feet of torque.
That's a little bit.
And we picked up 270 horsepower, nearly doubled the horsepower, which actually the math works. We're making 15 pounds of boost. That's 1 atmosphere, and it almost doubled the horsepower.
Turbo's the most efficient forced induction there is.
Absolutely.
It's cool.
It's cool.
And it held
The
together.
302 beat us.
I know, and you were so dying to see it splatter.
I started growing a fondness for it.
You got attached to it this time.
I did, I got attached.
I know. It's pretty cool though, especially considering the hack job that we did putting it together.
See, if it just would have fallen apart like all the rumors, it would have been like, yeah, okay, that's what we expected from a piece of junk. But no, it just stood in there and it fought it. You know, it just said, no, I'm not giving up, and it just made more and more and more power. God, what fun.
I know, that was great. You know what the most amazing thing about this actually is?
I'm waiting for you to tell me.
This motor came out of the Roadkill Rotsun and it failed to fail. Normally the Rotsun breaks everything all the time, but this thing did good.
I know, for a total turkey of a 5-liter Ford, that made it great.
It was magic. You know, often in our conclusions, I like to go through sort of my takeaway because I'm always thinking about it, often like a magazine editor. You know, when you do a dyno test and you have to go home and write the story and you're like, you know, what's really like the deep inner meaning of this? And the thing is, this is junk parts, but I think this is a combination anyone can do that's actually advisable.
Yeah.
You know, it's that the Power Stroke diesel turbo, you can get them. You can get them from rebuilders. It's a good deal. Banks, easy. Mail order the exhaust housing. These Mustang engines are still available everywhere, or you can get a rebuilt one. It's not that big of a deal, just forged piston short block. It's really very practical.
Plus, I want to say, you do not have to take this thing all the way to 16 or 18 pounds of boost.
No.
I mean, even on 10 or 12 or 8,
it would be a riot.
Plenty of power.
And live forever at that power level. Or you can throw 118 fuel in it and take it to the track. And, you know, I don't feel like this thing is just about to barf its guts all over the ground. There's that whole the block breaks in half deal, but so far this has survived. But I think the once again, the takeaway is pull a few pounds out of the thing, don't make that much power, and just have a blast for dirt cheap money. Anyone can do it.
It looks super fun.
I know it.
Man, you guys are gonna have a ball when you get this back in the car.
We need to do a real turbo next time.
Yeah.
Like actual good precision turbo on like a 572 big block Chevy.
I'm game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're boost guys now. And will be for now and forevermore on Engine Masters, which is presented by AMSOIL and supported by our friends at Mr. Gasket and Earl's Vapor Guard Hose.
So did you think I was gonna get the Flowbee haircut?
Dulcich, it was like the ultimate Flowbee. Your hair was getting pulled into the turbo.
You were afraid also we can watch your head get sucked up.
I know, and it start boring a hole through your brain.
Oh no.